Hi, welcome to the Louie File. I'd like to start a little bit of a study based on the letter to the Hebrews. So what better way to start than to read the first verse or two? So if you want, you can look along with me, follow along with me. Hebrews 1, starting at verse 1. It says, God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers and the prophets in many portions and in many ways, in these last days has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the world. And he is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature, and upholds all things by the word of his power. When he had made purification of sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much better than the angels, as he has inherited a more excellent name than they. Wow. So right off the bat, we're pointed to Jesus Christ. And the letter to the Hebrews is basically a letter proving over and over again that Jesus is God's real answer. That while all of the stuff in the Old Covenant, stories of angels and miracles and prophets, the story of the law of Moses being given, the story of Noah, the story of Lot and his wife, all of those stories, the story of King David and Solomon, in comparison, they all pale. Compared to Jesus Christ, they all pale. But God was trying to speak and speaking to us, to the world, to Israel, through those means in the past. But now, in these last days, he has chosen to speak to us through his Son, Jesus. He is the fulfillment of all of those pointers. All of those things in the Old Testament were merely pointers, shadows, and types. So the first chapter of Hebrews declares that, and he starts to tell us, and I'm not going to read every verse, but he starts to tell us in chapter 1 of Hebrews how Jesus is greater than the angels, and that God never said to any angel, sit at my right hand. But he has, we know, told his Son to sit at his right hand. So then, in the second chapter of Hebrews, we discover that God created man, based on Psalm 8, I believe it is. It says that God created man a little lower than the angels. Now, in Psalm 8, the word angels is actually the term Elohim. So there's a lot of debate over if that's really meaning God or merely an angel or what it means. I, for one, believe that it's talking about God, that God created man in his own image. So you have the hierarchy of God in the creation story. You have God, then you have man, then you have angels. So in Hebrews 2 we have something a tad bit different, and it says that talking about Jesus, and in Hebrews 2:9 it says, but we do see him who was made for a little while lower than the angels, namely Jesus, because of the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. So I believe what's happened here is God created man a little lower than him, and then the angels were there as servants, ministering spirits. When Adam bowed the knee, if you will, chose to agree with Satan, a fallen angel, he placed mankind under the angels. So then you had God and this fallen angel, matter of fact, over top of man. So it says that Jesus had to come a little lower than the angels, because that's where man found himself. He found himself fallen. So Jesus had to come not only in the form of a man, but he had to come in the likeness of sinful flesh to redeem us, to bring us out from under the fall and under the authority of the fallen one, Lucifer, who became Satan. Makes sense to me, right? So Jesus, by way of his death, burial, and resurrection, has freed us. It says in Hebrews 2, starting at verse 14, it says, therefore, since the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise also partook of the same, that through death he might render powerless him who had the power of death, that is, the devil, and might free those who through fear of death were subject to slavery all their lives. For assuredly he does not give help to angels, but he gives help to the descendant or the seed of Abraham. Therefore he had to be made like his brethren in all things, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For since he himself was tempted in that which he has suffered, he is able to come to the aid of those who are tempted. So that's a beautiful thing. So God, became a man. Just like it says in the Gospel of John, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. I mean, that is so great. So then, in chapter 3 of Hebrews, it says that Christ is greater than Moses. I mean, so throughout the letter of the Hebrews, we see Jesus being compared to lots of things, and the case is being made that he is greater than those things, as great as those things might have been. You know, Moses was a great man. He brought us the law, but Jesus is greater than him. And then he starts talking about the children of Israel and how they never entered into God's promised rest, but they just died in the wilderness. And it says because of unbelief. So then chapter 4 of Hebrews, which I could get into and talk a lot about, but I'm not going to right now for the sake of this video. But in chapter 4 of Hebrews, we discover that Jesus is really our rest. He is our promised land, and he is our Sabbath. The person of Jesus is where we find our rest. And the Bible in Hebrews 4 says that Moses basically couldn't give it to him, or didn't give it to him. Joshua didn't give him the rest. So that means there's a Sabbath rest remaining. So we are called in Hebrews 4:11 to be diligent to enter into that rest, which then leads us to Jesus being the perfect high priest in chapter 5 of Hebrews. And it says he was a son, and although he was a son, he learned obedience through the things that he suffered. And having been made perfect, he became to all those who obey him the source of eternal salvation. Wow. So then the author of Hebrews moves into Hebrews 6. Hebrews 6. Now that is a chapter which has stumbled a lot of people. And I, for one, would probably like to spend a little bit more time on that chapter to help, I hope, you to come through it unscathed. So I'll stop here for now in Hebrews 5, and then the next video I will pick up starting in Hebrews 6, and we'll move on from there. So I hope this helps you. Get your Bible out and join me for the next video. Thanks for watching.